All right, what's the deal with video games? They're so fun to play, but I have a love-hate relationship with them over the years. When I've spent countless hours playing them, the hate side is I have a lot of trouble disciplining and regulating my use of them to the point where I just have to make them inaccessible because if they're around, I'll often, my limbic system will overpower my whole brain and it's like a cookie that, smells warm, really good coming right out of the oven and I can't not eat it right away. That maybe says more about my character and than about video games themselves, but they're still a really fascinating topic to explore, especially given the rise of esports and how, frankly, millions of people are spending a whole lot of time playing them. So what's the deal with video games? Well, they have a drug-like quality to them. They're addictive and they affect us in the same way a lot of drugs do. So to explain that, let's first talk about basic psychology of rewards. So when most people think about a reward, they think about, when they've eaten Thanksgiving dinner and they got the cigarette butt and the mashed potatoes and the belt open and they're sitting back and they're very satiated and complacent. I think that's reward. That's consummatory reward. And that's not really the same as most good kinds of reward that come from purposeful engagement and moving towards a valued goal. That is the incentive reward system, and that runs on dopamine, which is this neurochemical associated with pleasure and positive emotion. So basic psychology is not consummatory reward is there, but also incentive reward gives you dopamine when you see something, you're standing in a field and you see across the field, you see your beautiful girlfriend with a plate of your favorite food and your favorite band is on the stage right there. And that's all reward. And then as you move across the field towards that valued reward, which is kind of that's the consummatory reward at the end. As you move across the field towards that goal, that's when you feel dopamine. That comes into your system. And it depends on how successfully you move across the field. If it's open and flat, there's no obstacles, and you're capable, great. But if you have a limp in your leg and there's a labyrinthine network of trenches dug in the field filled with lava and it's a maze, well, you'll have less dopamine because it's more difficult. So that's basic incentive reward system. Now, drugs like cocaine and heroin, what they do is they basically hijack that incentive reward system in your mind. And they create a facsimile of the purposeful engagement that in sober life can give you a little bit of dopamine. And what they do is they flood your system with dopamine and they make you feel this is awesome. It's like I've climbed a mountain, even though you're still sitting there and all you've done is you've drugged up. So video games, back to them, they're very similar to these very potent drugs in that video games are within the set of games. Video games are the subset that we have put in thousands and thousands of work hours into designing these little simulated artificial worlds that they don't, like cocaine and heroin, become a substance that you ingest that directly changes the neurochemistry going on in your mind, but they create an external experience, do video games, that mimics the effects of these drugs. So you get a whole lot of dopamine, but there are obviously problems with that, and that's where the hate side of the love-hate relationship comes in that I have with them. So I guess what happens if you play a lot of video games is you garble the calibration between stimulus and response, effort and reward, that your body most healthily and adaptively has to your experience. Okay, that's a bad sentence, but it's something like all the dopamine coming in from the video game kind of overloads and fries your dopamine circuitry in your brain. And then something that when you're not playing a video game and you're not doing a drug, that might give you a little trickle of dopamine, and something like climbing a mountain or working a difficult job or doing something valuable. and meaningful in life, that doesn't do it for you anymore, because it doesn't give you, it's not as immediate and it's not as potent a charge of dopamine you get, and that sense of reward. So, and that's exactly my experience with video games, is if I play them a lot, it garbles my calibration in my mind, and everything that's not the video game becomes really boring. And there's this interesting time-lapse situation where, say, this is the present and that's the future. If I'm playing a video game, I enjoy the experience in the present, but once the game ends and I can't play anymore because I'm too tired and I stop playing, then I zoom out from the video game into the larger real world, and I'm not happy because, well, the simulated game in which I'm getting all these rewards has ended, and I'm in this much larger and more difficult situation. Okay? Now, if instead I do something meaningful, like, I meditate, or I go on a walk, or I spend some quality time with someone I really care about and have a meaningful conversation, well, then what happens is it's often hard and boring and meaningful in the short run, but I know that I'll enjoy it at the end. So in the present, my knowledge of the future reward actually makes the effort worthwhile, and in the future, I actually get the reward. So it's good all the way through. With the video game, it's pleasurable in the here and now, in the short term, in the present, but I know that I know somewhere in the back of my mind that I'll be unhappy at the end of it. So that kind of ruins the short-term pleasure of the present moment. And then when I finish the game, the actual disappointment and displeasure kicks in. So there's a negative experience right through the whole way, from present to future. And that's a trade-off that I've noticed with a lot of technologies and things in the modern world. Technology and I guess video games and a lot of other things tend to make things fun and easy and less meaningful. And that's sometimes a good trade-off, but often doing things the hard way and the boring way is the more meaningful way. So in conclusion, video games. Games are good. All human cultures have invented and used games. There are very good reasons for them, because life is very hard and very complicated, and it's useful to simplify it a little bit into a game in order to, say, when you're a lion cub and you're playing with your brothers and sisters, you're wrestling on the savannah, you're playing a game, you're simulating and practicing the skills of hunting that you'll need to use later. So games are very useful, and there's an analog for human games, and there are many other useful purposes for games. So games are a good thing, but moderation in all things. The thing I'm going to strive to do is to understand that a game is this little artificial simulated world, like we said, that draws a box around things and makes almost everything irrelevant, and gives you a little situation in which the parameters and rules are clearly specified, the players and their allegiances and who's your enemy, who's on your team, that's clearly specified, and the playing field and the rules, those parameters are there, and the objectives and goals and rewards and what constitutes victory and defeat, those are all very clear to you. And therefore it's specific and it's achievable, and you know you can get the reward if you play well, but it's simplified. Now, what I just said, the definition of a game, any good definition of games that you come up with also applies to life itself. So the thing about life is it's this larger game, the largest game we can possibly imagine, and it contains all the other games that we invent, that we've imagined and spent a lot of time in. So what I'm going to strive to do is to understand that video games and games in general artificially invented human games are fun, but the larger game of life is maybe the best game you can play. So if you can open up and take on that larger challenge, where in life it is a game, but nothing's clear. You don't even know who's on your team. The rewards are delayed or non-existent. There's no referee. The rules are unclear. And it's just ongoing. So it's much more complicated and difficult, and you're not certain to get a flood of dopamine every time you win. And you play for keeps. You can't just respawn if your avatar dies. It's really serious, and it's really high stakes, but that makes it more meaningful, and therefore it makes it more worthwhile. So games are good, but I'm also going to work on zooming out and gamifying life itself, and seeing how to integrate everything in life into the game I'm playing, or expand my definition of games so that game itself becomes life itself becomes as much of a game as possible, rather than create all these divisions where, yeah, you have your life, which is, it's kind of a drag and it's kind of difficult and it has all this suffering involved in it. But when you escape into this cordoned off little artificial video game world, and then you have this painful transition when you're pulled out of that again, when that little escapism ends. So games are a fascinating topic. They're one of these grand metaphors that people can use for life itself. And it's no wonder that they're universal in human cultures. They're very useful. So I'm not going to say no to games, but I want to be very careful. And I think that it really behooves us all, as we develop more and more potent drugs and video games and technologies, it behooves us to have as much self-awareness and self-understanding and knowledge as possible about our own relationship with these potent, these very powerful things, and to be as conscious and deliberate and intentional with our engagement with those powerful forces as possible. Because as with a lot of things in life, especially in modern life, the 21st century world that we find ourselves in, we have a whole lot of power, but we don't yet have the wisdom to match that power. And we really need to bring that ratio back towards a healthy balance. So good luck to us.